nationally, we've been working for the last 7 years to get sanctions introduced into the Code of Conduct, and government is incredibly reluctant to introduce any sanctions. Why?
Why, indeed. Hi, Jackie.
Hello there.
How are you?
I'm all right, thank you, but I think we should both be doing something different on a Bank Holiday Monday.
Perhaps Bank Holiday Monday, indeed. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it, and I hope that the viewers will get a lot out of this. So thank you. So I wanted to just start maybe the dry bit first and ask you about the sort of the technicalities of the clip that sort of drove your viral accession in the last few years, because people not familiar with the sort of local politics may not understand. I mean, even I, who's got a bit of experience in this, wasn't 100% sure what was going on. So are you able to just unpick why you were there in a kind of mediation role and what was kind of going on?
Yeah. I mean, I've been afforded all sorts of roles at that particular meeting, including being the chairman and the clerk and a mediator and a facilitator. So yes, happy to try. I work for a county association, the Cheshire Association of Local Councillors, and there's an association in every one of the Shire counties. So I think there's 47 of us. And what we do is provide training, advice, guidance, support to the parish councils in our area. So in Cheshire, there's a little team of 3 of us. And in Handforth, they had struggled because their clerk was unavailable. Their chairman wouldn't call a meeting, and 2 councillors, as they are enabled to do, called a meeting. But it meant that they had none of the infrastructure necessary to call a meeting, like Zoom, etc. So they approached us and we said, yeah, we will help you do that. So I was there for 2 reasons. One, the very practical one of just simply hosting the Zoom meeting. But secondly, just facilitating, so that, I was just taking notes for them and pressing buttons as they needed as they went on.
Yeah, brilliant. And thanks for clarifying. Well, I mean, when I first saw it, it just seemed like carnage. It did come across like a really like, oh, this is one of the lost Monty Python sketches that's just resurfaced suddenly or something. So I can definitely see why they would need some kind of mediation in that situation. Even with you there, it seems.
I mean, certainly, I expected it to be a tense meeting. I think for a while, a lot of Handforth meetings had been quite confrontational.
Okay.
But I never expected it to go from 0 to 90 in about 5 seconds, as it did. I don't think any of us are used to seeing people that angry.
No.
Over a council meeting.
Yeah. Well, so the second question I have for you is, was your experience in that meeting, is that the norm? Is that something that you've had hundreds of times before, or there's an exception?
No, it's absolutely exceptional. I mean, I've done my job now for just over 23 years.
Okay.
And I think we're all used to people putting their points across, sometimes in an indelicate way. I think that people get very passionate about things that they feel very strongly about, and sometimes forget themselves when they're arguing the point. But what you saw at Handforth was personal. It wasn't about us arguing the point. No,
you got that instantly. You could see that there was a backstory there that stretched, so I'm in a way, I'm sort of looking forward to the sequel, to see how it all gets resolved and stuff. And I guess there has been a sequel already, but we just haven't seen it yet.
There's been, I think there've been 3 meetings since then. The first one afterwards was not an easy meeting by any means.
No.
And it wasn't helped by members of the public that turned up literally to make fun of it. And I think that maybe it could have been handled a little differently. But I think subsequent to that, they've managed to hold reasonable meetings. probably because the 3 councillors have tended not to turn up.
Oh, is that the reason?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
If you watch the rest of the video, you'll hardly hear me speak at all. There's no reason for me to.
No.
And it progresses into a meeting talking about, if I can remember right, the local plan and the local railway station.
Yeah.
The kind of things that you would expect local councils to talk about.
Indeed. And also the sorts of things that people wouldn't tune in to watch ordinarily.
Well, that's also true.
Yeah. So that's part of the reason, I guess, why it went viral, is because it's reassuring to note that it was an exception, because if that was the norm, then we might as well all just give up and go home, because that was just carnage. Yeah.
But I mean, even if it wasn't a council meeting, I mean, there's something appalling about people behaving like that in a group, full stop.
Yeah, for sure. So you've been rightly, in my opinion, applauded for being very sort of cool, calm and collected. Do you, Jackie Weaver, have a background in kind of mediation, or like, I don't know, have you picked, or is it just something you've just picked up over the years? Have you had training in how to manage these situations?
A lot of it does come from experience.
Okay.
And a lot of it comes from much gentler experience than you saw at Handforth.
Yeah.
But I'm also a qualified counsellor and qualified mediator.
Okay. Yeah, because I
felt like both of those skills were quite important in the job that I did.
Yeah. Well, because this is something I was interested in, and I'd like to discuss a bit more later, is that if someone's watching this on the outside who may be thinking about coming to politics, and they're looking at it and thinking, Jesus, that is a really intense environment. Like, I don't know if I'd have been able to handle that. And like, I've worked in different environments, different professional environments, and I've never had to deal with something as confrontational, and it came across as quite toxic as well. We'll come into some of that stuff in a little while, but I guess the fact that you've got experience and the fact that you've been trained in this gave you in that moment the ability to navigate it in a way that maybe the average person watching wouldn't have been able to do, perhaps.
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure you must be right. I guess that in the moment, I mean, for a start, I hadn't been expecting it. I was approaching it from a more Machiavellian angle of how were we going to manipulate this meeting in order for the councillors that didn't want the meeting to go ahead to be prevented. You know, what mechanism were they going to use? Yeah. So I wasn't expecting a full frontal attack.
No, they came charging out of the blocks, didn't they? Yeah, very much.
Not only did they do that, but they did it twice. So the first meeting was 7 o'clock, and that's exactly how they behaved at 7 o'clock.
Right.
With exactly the same result.
Yeah.
And then they did it again at past for the next council meeting, because they had a planning meeting and then a council meeting.
Right. Okay.
And even then, I couldn't believe that you would employ the same plan when it had failed the first time. Yeah,
that is crazy, actually. So their strategy, I guess, was to just undermine your authority and to just poo-poo the whole thing and just say it's unlawful or read the standing orders and all. It was, I guess, that was their angle. But ultimately it failed.
Nothing else.
No.
Which was ridiculous, because I mean, the logical thing to do would have been to have started the meeting and outvoted everything. Yeah.
Well, now they know what to do next time. You're so good at mediation, you're giving them tips now.
That was what they had previously done, interestingly.
Okay.
That was their usual way of operating.
Okay. So they had a voting majority?
Yes. Well, 3+3. So there was 3 on one side, 3 on the other, and the chairman, of course, has the casting vote. Yeah. They would win everything.
So I read around this, and the reason why this was called partially was because there'd been a councillor who had not turned up to meetings in the past. I don't want to spend too long on the technical stuff, because there's more interesting stuff to talk about, but was that the reason why there was this power struggle?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, a 6-month vacancy was declared. They challenged it. Everyone agrees. When I say everyone, National Association of Local Councils, Society of Local Council Clerks, the monitoring officer, the borough solicitor. I mean, anybody you could really ask.
Yeah.
All agreed. The elections team all agreed. Properly called vacancy.
Okay.
They wouldn't have it, and suspended the clerk for having called it in the first place.
Right. Okay. So it was a really kind of nasty power struggle, almost like a vacuum there, and and they just didn't want to give up.
Yeah, I mean, they were absolutely desperate that the election doesn't take place.
Yeah,
which it's going to.
Yeah,
and the likelihood is that will completely change the power dynamics in the council.
Okay. So okay. I mean, I guess that's not abnormal in that those who know they're about to lose power will try any trick in the book to try and stall or delay or whatever it is. In certain quarters.
I've never had that much power that I've tried to hold on to.
No. Indeed, yeah. So I wanted to ask you, what does the national reaction to all of this tell us about, let's just go big, what does it tell us about our country right now? Because for me, there were two overriding emotions that I had from this. One, I was reassured that you came out of it as the sort of star, and also a bit sad that we would feel the need to champion someone that just had basic dignity and politeness. Like, are we at that level now where, Jackie Weaver's a celeb because she's polite? Like, because it's like, oh my God, someone polite in politics? Like, so, I mean, what does the reaction nationally tell us about where we are politically in terms of our...
I think there's a lot of, I mean, I think there's an awful lot of things to pick up. And I think that's why so many people are interested, because it doesn't just hit one button.
Yeah.
I think there is very much a sense of people feeling that there are many injustices that we just simply accept and move on. And here we saw quasi-justice being delivered quite succinctly.
Yeah.
And in a timely fashion as well, because these things, I mean, it seems as if things drag on forever. You kind of, you hear all these stories in the paper, and by the time you hear the resolution, you've completely forgotten what the question was.
That's true. Yeah.
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 I think there's also a depressing recognition that we haven't traveled as far as we thought we had. That actually, I thought, having spent, I don't know, working life of 45 years probably in total, certainly has seen bad behaviour along the way. But blimey, I thought young people had resolved it. And my inbox tells me that's not the case at all. So there's a nerve touch there. I think that there are a lot of women who feel very much underdogged still. And again, although we hear it on the telly, which is my major place for news, I don't think we actually believe it. I think we just think, women are just wittering about something. It's not that bad. Don't worry about it. Moving on. And I think there's also something about a suspicion that politics actually can be nasty. And feeling that that's what you saw.
I wanted to pick you up just on one of the things you said there about there was this sense that we'd sort of solved this, or we'd come such a long way. I'm interested in this because obviously there's been a lot of talk in the last 12 months or so around sexism and also around racism in our society, and to what extent is it, just rampant. We thought we were this progressive, liberal, open, tolerant society, and as a school teacher, I teach these British values in the school, and we tell ourselves that we are tolerant. It's one of the four we have to teach. And I'm forever thinking to myself, it doesn't appear as though we are, because there's so much evidence now, and maybe it's just because we're talking about it more, that it dominates the news cycle more. I don't know, but do you think that we've regressed, or do you think that we've stalled, or do you think that we've just been in denial about how progressive, how much progress we've made. I mean, this is something that I keep wondering about myself.
I think your language is interesting, James.
Go on.
You said tolerant.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of women feel tolerated.
Okay. Tolerated. What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
That it's not, to tolerate isn't the same as to equate. So that, you know, I think many women ask the question of, you know, do you feel patronized by men?
Yeah.
Personally, I don't. Well, I say I don't. I have been just recently, and I'm still smarting from it because it's been years since it's happened to me. I mean,
Really?
I was a young woman the last time somebody treated me like that.
Yeah.
And it was a politician.
And was that off the back of this spiral? Yeah. Okay. Do you want to go into that? Do you?
I won't name the politician,
Okay.
but I think his opening remark was, "You're that woman off the telly."
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I nearly replied, "Oh, you're that prat with the funny hair," but didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't
Because,
Boris. It was not Boris.
no. Well, there's, yeah. I mean,
And this was when we had both been invited to get to be guest speakers at something.
Oh, really? So you were there as equals, but he treated you as though, oh, you're just this nobody that's just 5 minutes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That may be true in global media terms.
Yeah.
But I was somebody before 2.5 months ago.
Of course. Yeah.
So it was quite interesting. And it was also interesting because it was in an environment that prides itself on equality.
Right.
And this is a person who has a position of power there.
Mm. So it's almost like it's a blindness.
Mm.
And saying one thing and doing another, not practicing what you preach. It's just hypocrisy, ultimately.
Yeah, but it was just being funny, of course.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that would be his defense, isn't it? It's kind of, what do you call it? The Schrodinger's, not to be too offensive, but Schrodinger's a-hole, where you say something, you wait for the response. If it's a positive response, you mean it, and if it's a negative response, you're just joking. I don't know if you've come across that. Yeah.
Yep. I haven't heard it called that, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Familiar with the
and then, of course, if you don't see the funny side of it, well,
then it's your problem.
Then the humor.
Yeah, you've got no sense of humor. Yeah. It's a bully tactic, isn't it? Ultimately, you see it all the time with.
Well, yes.
Yeah. I'll come back to this because there's a lot there that I still want to go into, but I've got my order, and I feel like I'll ask this next question, and maybe we'll come back to that bit. So I wanted to ask you, do you think that there's been, this is sort of going back to what we were just talking about a little bit, but with the last few years, with sort of the contempt of Parliament, with the Priti Patel bullying report that came out, my own personal view is I feel like there's been a kind of rot at the top. And I don't want to ask you too much of a leading question because I know you're not a sort of party political figure. But let me ask you this. Do you think that, generally speaking, the political class now care about the Nolan Principles? Are you familiar with, of course, you'll be familiar with the Nolan Principles. Do you think, I mean, if for those who don't know, it's the principles which public figures have to abide by in public office, and they're telling the truth, integrity, and all of those sorts of things. I think there are 7 or 8. 7. Well, thanks. Do you think that our political class are hypocritical in that they say a good game but maybe don't follow them? My own personal feeling is that I'm not seeing enough at the top at the moment to justify these principles being in effect right now. But I mean, you're closer to it than me, so I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, I'll start with the Code of Conduct, which is what the Nolan Principles undermine it. What's the word? Underline. And I think we have a perfectly good code of conduct for local councils, absolutely entrenched in the Nolan Principles. But the problem we have is that there are no sanctions if the Nolan Principles are breached. So the councillors that you saw at Handforth are currently the subject of investigation from before that night.
Really? Okay.
Subsequent to that night,
Right.
because
Okay.
people made a complaint about the behaviour, not me.
Yeah.
But when they are found guilty of having breached the code, because they clearly did.
They totally did. Yeah.
Yeah. Nothing will happen.
Right.
They may be asked to undertake diversity training. They may be asked to apologise, but neither can be enforced.
Really?
And
Okay.
nationally, we've been working for the last 7 years to get sanctions introduced into the code of conduct, and government is incredibly reluctant to introduce any sanctions. Why?
Why? Indeed.
Where is the logic in that?
Mm.
So what we do instead is we tinker with the wording of the code of conduct so we make it even nicer. It was fit for purpose before, it's still fit for purpose, and we still have no sanctions.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm surprised when I talk to people who work with politicians, not all politicians, who say, that's the kind of behaviour that we expect. We see that behaviour every day.
That's sad.
And that has to make me question whether or not that's part of the reason that there is no appetite for sanctions.
Because it's just so normalised.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like you can't do politics without toxicity. They go hand in hand.
It's even more endemic than that. I mean, many years ago, I can't remember when, we had, when the code was first introduced, so I think that's 2007, but don't quote me on that. And the Standards Board for England, which was a government quango that eventually grew like Topsy, and like many quangos then disappeared. And it used to have lawyers, solicitors, looking into any complaints that came forward. And one of their rulings that I always remember was that if a councillor was to call James an ignorant little prat, then that would be a breach of the code of conduct. But if he called a fellow councillor an ignorant little prat, that would not be a breach of the code.
Okay.
Because it would be deemed to be part of the rough and tumble of local politics.
Right.
Really?
Yeah. So the people in the positions can get away with more.
Well, that it's acceptable in politics to be less cordial than you might be to any other human being.
Indeed. Yeah. I wonder, I remember reading about why Parliament is the size it is and why not everyone has a seat. And Churchill's defense of it apparently was because they want to create a kind of adversarial environment where everyone's really closed in and bickering and almost like entertainment value. And I've long thought about I remember reading a book about Brexit or something, and it said in France, in order to get elected, you have to pretend you're an intellectual, a professor or something. In the UK, you have to pretend to be a character. And this feeling in the UK that it's all about entertainment, like we're bored by these kind of like suited, grey-haired, sensible talking people that just got, a droning voice and just get on with the job. They're not fun. We don't care about them. But someone comes along who's, a buffoon, or who's a demagogue and a populist. We listen to them because they're entertaining. And so I wonder if we tolerate this kind of this bile between groups because it gets clicks and it generates and the media feed it and it gets in the news cycle. And I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I think that's really depressing. But I wonder if in part, I'm not sure I agree with your full statement. But I do wonder if maybe part of it is about the media, in that, you know, you can't be a politician sat alone in a room on your own. You know, by definition, you kind of need to get in touch with people.
Yeah, exactly.
And you are going to need the media to enable you to do that.
Totally. Yeah.
And that means you got to do something. Now, if you go out and stroke a few cats or rescue a dog or something, okay, that might get you in the paper for 30 seconds. But what are you going to do tomorrow? Because you don't want 2 dogs.
Yeah. There's only so many cats that need rescuing.
Well, there you go.
No, it's an interesting, but I find that notion of performance, you know, the performative element of politics, I find that really interesting, because I wonder if we hang up too much on that. But let's move on. So I wanted to ask you about something you said a little bit earlier as well, but something you said in an article for Holyrood. In it, you said, going into that environment, you said, I thought that we'd have a little bit of verbal abuse. And you said you expect that. And I, like I said to you at the beginning, in my different professions in teaching and in other professions that I worked in, I don't think I've ever walked into an environment expecting abuse. If anything, I would expect, you know, the highest possible standards of civility. But going back to what we were just talking about here, that there does appear to be this question of, if it's kind of a robust discussion, then we can maybe that there are no consequences, and the Nolan Principles don't really. There's no accountability. So, is it if a young person was listening to this conversation now, what's the incentive for them to come into an environment where there's just a normalized low-level abuse context that they're going to be walking into?
Well, the reason I said that I was expecting it was I was going to Handforth. I wasn't going to any of the 233 other councils in Cheshire that I could have gone to that night.
Okay.
And because of Handforth's history, that meeting was just definitely going to be difficult.
Right. So it was more specific to that particular meeting.
Very specific to that.
Okay.
And you know, like I said, I mean, you know, watch young people playing games. That seems like at times a pretty hostile environment. I don't just mean the game, but I mean, I've listened to my sons playing with each other before now. It sounds like they'll come to blows. They are grown men, by the way, but they still spend a lot of time on the internet. I suppose there's worse things they could be doing on the internet.
Well, yeah, we millennials, we grew up with it, so
absolutely
here to stay.
So you know, there's that sense of being enthusiastic about something and it being noisy. You know, I think young people can deal with that. And it certainly isn't a hostile environment, but there are councils where it becomes unpleasant. And whatever issues there have been in the past, wherever those issues start, they can get very, very entrenched.
A friend of mine is or used to be actually a county councillor in Devon. And I remember listening to her commentary on your viral clip on Facebook, and she was saying, this is just standard. Her argument was, she had been in this situation 100 times. And this is kind of where I wanted to sort of pin you down this a little bit more, was just because I wondered if it's endemic, if it's something that we're just not talking about, or maybe just not aware of because it's happening at a lower level of politics. But her opinion was that it was just, it's that kind of abusive environment where it's almost like the Wild West, where the rules just seem to go out the window at times, is quite standard.
That's interesting at county council level. My experience of county council meetings is more that the biggest danger is you'll fall asleep rather than you'll have, you know, the Wild West.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think I mentioned earlier about how, no, maybe I didn't, about Zoom meetings, other platforms are available. where actually they're doing a lot to show the public, what's actually happening on their councils. And of course, if you don't like the way your councillor behaves, what are you voting for them for? Do something about it. And sometimes you find, some of the most badly behaved councillors, get in year after year. Why? You're voting for them. Stop it.
Indeed. And I have a question on this later, so perhaps we'll come back to that as well. I don't know if you come across Peter Oborne's criticisms of, did you know Peter Oborne? No, a journalist. I think he was the chief political correspondent for the Telegraph, and he worked at the Daily Mail, I think, at one point anyway. He's just written a book called The Assault on Truth, which I've just been reading, and that's all about how standards at the top have been slipping now to the point where we just feel so like bludgeoned by it. It just becomes so normalized. It's just day after day after day, and the public they're just so bamboozled that they don't know what's up or down anymore. So that's another interesting kind of thesis on this whole situation as to why these people keep getting in. Is maybe it's just becoming more and more normal. It's just that there's chaos and there's this sort of thing that happened to you. I hope that's not the case. But that is my fear. But anyway, let's move on, because there's a little more I want to talk to you about. So, Jackie, was the aggressive and dismissive attitudes on show in that call an example of sexism?
At the time, I don't think it even crossed my mind. I think it felt very much like a personal attack. I didn't see them as gentlemen. But I didn't see them as men and me as a woman. I didn't see that at all. I guess my view has changed. I think largely in part because of the communication that I've had from other people, from other women. Some interesting ones, mainly saying, this is what I deal with in my everyday job. And we're not talking about people who are in politics. That this is rife in our department. This is the kind of thing I experience in meetings all the time, talked over, all that kind of thing. I'm dismissed, tolerated. So I guess it's caused me to revisit it. And yeah, I don't know. I also am unsure of how a man would have reacted in the same position.
Yeah.
I guess that if a man had felt attacked in that way, and boy, am I generalizing here, I wonder if they would have reacted more aggressively.
Possibly, yeah.
Maybe that would have stopped it.
Possibly.
No, I don't know.
Would they have reacted differently to a man if a man was being aggressive? Possibly.
I don't know. I think particularly Aled's iPad just seemed out of control.
Yeah.
I don't think Aled really noticed what was in front of him.
Okay.
Apart from the fact his dad was hanging onto his leg to stop him putting his hands through the screen, I think.
Yeah. I think he'd seen red.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But where did that start? Because he came out fighting. Although I guess his reaction was because I'd put the chairman in the waiting room, and it was like, it was as if he could not get his head around it.
Yeah, I suppose, perhaps I'll generalize here, but maybe at the kind of lower political level, that power is so sacrosanct, because it is and precious, that for somebody to come along and to challenge it, who perhaps they don't even know, it is to justify in their minds an absolute outrageous response of aggression. Maybe, it seemed incredibly petty that for him to have reacted like that. But I think For me, I mean, I chatted about this in my staff room with some of my colleagues, female colleagues, because I said, "Oh, I'm interviewing Jackie," and I wondered if, as you know, my female co-workers, if you had any thoughts on the sexism in there, and they all agreed to every single one of them said, definitely sexist. Like what we saw there was 100% sexism, and I was like, okay, I'll bear that in mind. For me, I think it was the bit where I said, "Will you stop talking?" That bit, I was like, whoa, like what? Because he had this really soft voice, and it's quite high up and quite soft, and almost like he was whispering, and then it was kind of, "Will you stop talking?" And I was like, whoa, that's yeah. And it made me wonder if a man had been there, because you hear about these stats, don't you, where people feel more confident if there's a male pilot who comes over the tannoy than a female pilot, and so the notion of having a male voice, would that have de-escalated the situation more just by virtue of the gender? So yeah, there's a lot there to unpick.
I guess the bit that sticks in my mind that just seemed so weird was when he said something like, he keeps calling me Jackie Weaver, as if it's one word, you know. Yeah. So it's not Mrs. Weaver. It's not
no,
Ms.
that's true.
Weaver. It's not Jackie, because that's too friendly.
Yeah.
So it's Jackie Weaver.
Yeah, like a
naughty child. And then he said, will you just get on with whatever it is that you're trying to do?
Yeah.
So, shut up and move on, and then I will do. But
yeah, it did. It was just so dismissive. The tone was just so dismissive, and just no respect at all. It was a really uncomfortable viewing. Yeah.
And then there was also when Julie's iPad, Cynthia, her name is really, also tried to defend me. Then his father, Alad's father, chips in with something like, "That's rich coming from a girl from Birkenhead."
Yeah. It's like, oh.
Do they have a bad reputation, girls from Birkenhead?
I'm trying to remember. Are you 100% sure it was a girl from Birkenhead and not "That's rich coming from you from Birkenhead"?
Not sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Just because if anyone's listening, that might be something they query. But no, I mean, for sure. Yeah, you could tell that there was just so much partisan loathing there, which added to the level of sort of just carnage. But I was going to ask you, have any of them since apologized or shown any contrition? No. Okay.
No, in fact, the chairman has commissioned a video, and it sets out in very calm language about all he was trying to do that night was make it clear that it was an unlawful meeting and it should not have gone ahead. And then goes on to, I can't listen to the rest of it, but there's several more minutes of the justification of the Local Government Act 19 whatever, none of which applies because the meeting hadn't started, but there you go.
It's even if he has an argument on the kind of law side of things, which that's not why this clip went viral. The clip went viral because of the abuse that was prevalent in the video, and these are elected representatives. These aren't just people that have been employed by a council or something. These are people that have been elected. Therefore, they should be held to the highest possible standards, as far as I'm concerned. And as far as I think all of us would agree, and yet they, in that clip, showed the worst type of playground antics. Like, this is the sort of stuff that if we witnessed in a classroom, those kids would be like seriously, they would be sent out, maybe even internal suspension or something, that we'd have discussions about sexism in the class. Like you said, it's really sad and disappointing that there's no way to properly enforce anything here. So perhaps that's the takeaway for me, for sure, is that we need to have a discussion about how we enforce.
Well, there's currently a government call for evidence out into why Why should we change the current structure?
Mm.
And goodness knows how many more. When you look at how many complaints go to the monitoring officer in each of the borough councils, bearing in mind there are 10,000 parish councils. So, I mean, if there's only one from each, that's still an awful lot.
Yeah.
There's got to be something that says we, that's the kind of wider we, do not accept that behaviour.
Mm.
Rather than just don't do it again.
Yeah, totally.
And, we've had many years of working to improve standards, encourage it through training and stuff like that. For some people, like you saw at Handforth, carrots do not work.
Mm. Mm. So it's that age-old debate around sanctions or incentives, isn't it? I guess, and it's the same in the classroom. Do you use, positive reinforcement, or do you go down the other route? And I think, it's a good point you make, for sure. But I don't know if, again, because you don't come from a sort of political partisan angle, perhaps you won't necessarily have the same sort of angle as I do with this. But I look at the people in power at the top now, and I feel like they just double down. It used to be that you'd resign, or you'd take a step back or something, or that you would just apologise. But these days, if you get caught out going to Barnard Castle, you get a live television opportunity to lie to the public, for instance, in the case of Dominic Cummings. Or if there's a report commissioned which shows that you've bullied your staff and broken the ministerial code, you just double down and you just get all of your ministers to come to your defence on Twitter and just say how wonderful you are. In the past, I'm certain that somebody like Priti Patel would have been forced to resign after that report, and someone like Dominic Cummings would have been forced to resign having been caught out breaking the rules. But it just appears to me at the moment as though we're in a period of just doubling down, because there doesn't appear like we have the power to change what's going on at the top. It just feels like we're living through a period of rot at the top. And this is totally my opinion, but it's a tricky one to know how to deal with, because that's my view of it, as I feel like we are heading backwards a little bit in terms of standards at the top.
But perhaps it goes back to your earlier comment, which was around almost politicians being characters or players or actors almost.
Mm.
And that's certainly how they behave.
Mm.
I mean, when your popularity is waning, decide you're gay. When your popularity is waning a bit further, no, I'm not really gay, I'm bisexual. So it's kind of anything you can think of. And I had a drug addiction, by the way.
Mm.
I'm really struggling at the moment with alcohol. And what else? Let's have a health scare in there too. I mean, it's like any flaw. I don't necessarily mean those were flaws, but I mean kind of. I was drunk and I ran somebody over, but fortunately they're not dead. And it's, well, I'm in rehab, so that'll be okay then. We kind of have this mentality where everything has to be forgiven. Nobody's held accountable for anything. Yeah,
and I think you're right. I think that there does appear to be an accountability black hole there right now, which needs addressing for sure. Yeah. So I wanted to move on and talk about women in politics. And obviously I'm a man, so maybe I'm not the best person 100% to be talking about this, but I wanted to talk about it nonetheless. Only 35% of councillors in England and Wales are women. Do you have any notion as to why that is, or could you speculate possibly on why that might be?
Certainly at parish council level, it's nearer 40.
Okay.
But, it still isn't 50.
No.
Your point's still fairly made. All I would say about that is that has grown. It certainly used to be much more male dominated than it is at the moment. I think part of it is that whether you share the view or not, I think women do still have more care responsibilities than men do.
Yeah, for sure.
and council meetings by definition are in the evening. So that, you know, you've got children to put to bed, you might have elderly parents to put to bed, for goodness sake. And, you know, here we have the opportunity to extend virtual meetings past the 7th of May, and we may be about to lose that. So I think that that alone might have had some impact on changing the demographic. Isn't the be all and end all, but it might have had some impact on that.
Yeah, totally. Do you
think? I mean, it would certainly make meetings generally more attractive to a younger audience. You know, being able to dip into it of an evening without having to go and sit in a village hall for the night.
Yeah. So technology could help.
It could help. It's not the answer.
No.
Just like Alexa isn't the answer to keeping old people happy with somebody to talk to. And a phone box is not a library. But yeah, it's part of it. It's part of that journey to making politics at local level more relevant to local people. And it is relevant to them. They just don't realise it.
Yeah, totally. And so my next question was about young people. And about whether local politics is something that they ought to care about, or to get involved with. And as I said to you before I started recording, my younger brother Jack is a councillor, and he's in his 20s, but that's quite unusual, you know, statistically. So why should anyone, but young people perhaps in particular, why should they care about local politics?
Local politics, local councils are not sexy. They're not even terrifically interesting to people outside, but they are a fantastic mechanism for achieving goals. So that, you know, if your ambition is to change something in your community, then your local council is a fabulous place to start that conversation and to make it happen, and to make it happen before you become one of the old people on the council. Yeah, it's where the money is. I mean, I always think one of the beauties of a local council is that it no longer relies on the same people turning up to the same fete, baking the same cakes and doing the same input every year, and other people get the benefit of it. It means that everyone can contribute according to their needs, so that when you do have facilities that are improved in your community, the whole community's paid for it. Win-win. So I don't say get involved with politics or local democracy, I prefer to call it, because it's exciting and it's something you should really want to do. Yeah, get involved in it because it will do something for you. You know, it's a tool, it's a mechanism for achieving something locally, and you don't use it often enough. It has a secondary role as well, and I kind of feel it as a secondary role, and that is, I think it's a good starting ground for youngsters who want to go into politics. I think it gives you an opportunity to experience local democracy without having the party element to it, because I think the party element changes everything.
In a good way or a bad way?
I think I took too long to answer
that. Should we skip over that? Yeah.
I think the trouble with politics, and I don't speak from a particularly informed position, is that you begin to have two masters. Yeah. You have the community and you have the party. Yeah. If they're in sync, brilliant. If they're not.
Yeah. And too often there are politicians that will put party above the interests of their community. And that's one of the things, downsides of the party.
That, of course, is the system, because unless you do that, you will not be elected next year and you will make no difference locally.
Indeed. And that's true of all parties. I think there are some where you can maybe be a bit more of a rebel and get away with it. Particularly if you're, I mean, I'm in the Lib Dems, and the Lib Dems of, there's no such thing as a Lib Dem safe seat, for instance. So if you're trying to, you know, win seats in the Celtic fringe in the north of Scotland and the south of England, you can get away with maybe having a little bit of an anti-London tone to what you're saying, possibly. Whereas if you're trying to win a seat in Bath or in London or something, then obviously you can mix it up a little bit. So I think there's in the Lib Dems, I've always felt as though you can be a bit more of a rebel and get away with it. Whereas in the Conservative Party, I have friends who are in the Conservative Party and they just say, look, it's like the mafia. You do as you're told and you work your way up by being very deferential to the elites in your party. And that's the way you get ahead in the Conservative Party. And that's not if you're a born contrarian like me, that doesn't work. So, but no, you're right to mention the downsides of the party system for sure. Yeah, I think that's a very valid point indeed. So I wanted to ask you about Parliament Project. So I actually hadn't heard of this until I was researching you. So this is something that you're involved with, isn't it? But are you able to talk a little bit about what it is? And
only a little, because I am only involved in the periphery.
Okay.
But our aims and objectives are pretty much the same. So we kind of come across each other at parties these days.
Great.
So I mean, their aspiration is to encourage women into politics.
Great.
At whatever level. And they have mediators, mentors. They have some funding available, if that's the barrier. And generally look at supporting women of any party into politics.
And is there a specific kind of person they're interested in getting into?
Young.
Okay, so more of a focus on young women.
But yeah, young people, young women.
Okay, young women. Yeah, and that's a very noble and worthwhile thing to get involved with. If there are any young women listen to this, what would they have to do to get involved with that? Is it just a case of Googling?
Just Google Parliament Project, you're in. I think it's the first, I don't know what you call it, but it's the thing at the top. Will come up every time. Great. And if people are interested generally and they're not terribly young and they're not women, although they could be, then have a look at the National Association of Local Councils website. That's nalc.gov.uk. And there's loads of free information there. About, including things like how you stand for a council, how you create a council. We still have some unparished areas.
Okay. Interesting. I might have to have a look at that myself, actually. Yeah. I'm just going to quickly throw this in. I haven't got it on my list, but because you're a councillor, you've been a councillor for a little while in the past, no?
I was 25 years ago. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. In the past. Yeah. Why did you get involved in local politics in terms of elected local politics? And then, so the bit I'm going to add in is, why did you leave and then go into what you do now? If our message of this podcast is we need more young women in politics, we need more women in politics, at the local level particularly, what was it that made you sort of leave elected politics and go into what you do now?
Okay.
Yeah.
The first thing, there are lots of roles in local politics and local government, and they're all really important, not just the elected members.
Okay. Yeah.
I stood as I went along for a job at my local parish council, tiny parish council, and I didn't get it. They didn't make me clerk. Now that's okay.
Their loss, Jackie.
That's okay, except they gave it to the chairman's wife.
Oh,
that
right.
was not okay.
No.
And I have a terrible sense of fair play. Always have done. That's not fair. So I decided to stand as a councillor in the next election.
Good for you. Okay.
And became a councillor. And I did, I must have done nearly 4 years because I served a term and then stood down.
Cool.
It was not for me.
No.
The kind of things that I was interested in terms of provision locally, etc., were just never going to happen in a community quite as small as ours. So, we would never have managed to sort of reach critical mass. So the council for me was more about making representation on local issues. Now that was fine, but it didn't seem to make a big enough impact.
Okay.
So for me, I preferred to be the person in the background who helps make things work,
Right.
across a bigger area. So hence, training and basically giving support and assistance in the background to many councils is something that I felt that was more for me.
Yeah.
I'm not really a people person.
Okay. Do you need to be?
I think you do as a councillor.
Okay.
I think it's really important that people and your community matter a great deal to you. I think I'm probably quite a kind of insular person in my own right.
Yeah.
Which is fine, but I wouldn't make an ideal councillor.
Well, you had the initial passion to do it, which I think is, do you have to have that initial passion?
I think a lot of people come to local democracy because of a sense of injustice about something.
Yeah.
Something isn't right.
Yeah.
And I need to fix it.
Indeed. Yeah.
And I think that's what pushes people into action.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody kind of gets involved with something that's working and just kind of seamlessly rolls on in the background. Why? It's doing fine. Leave it alone.
Unless you're using it as a ladder, which some do, I guess.
Yeah, but even then, I think they probably want to kind of shake it up a bit because you need to get noticed. Yeah.
Although change for the sake of change is not always necessarily a good thing in that case. But I'm totally with you in that, being able to connect with the voters is obviously an important part of one, getting elected, but also probably being good at the role. It's not to say you necessarily have to be, an extrovert going to all the parties and doing all the schmoozing and all of that to be a good politician. I'm sure there are plenty of politicians that quite like to keep themselves to themselves and do a very good job.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I guess I don't really understand the system whereby you can be a parliamentary candidate for somewhere you don't know. So
being parachuted in to somewhere which you don't know the area at all. You mean? Yeah. That I've always found that really odd. Yeah. And then you win, and you're just like, so you're not really voting for the candidate because they've got no form here. They couldn't name you the local Chinese, takeaway. They couldn't tell you which road certain things are. They don't know anything about this place.
No.
But because they've got a blue or a red rosette on, you vote for them. Yeah. That is definitely.
And then they go on to be a minister, or some senior politician, and they don't even remember you, pet.
No. And then it's just the staff in the office doing all the local stuff, isn't it? So there, if you've got a minister as an MP, their ministerial job almost certainly is going to take precedent over the local issue stuff, isn't it? Let's be honest.
It has to.
And if you're unfortunate enough to have the Speaker of the House of Commons as your MP, then you don't even have an MP, do you?
Quite.
Which is a really odd. Was really odd because they're not allowed to vote in Parliament or anything, are they? So
we've almost talked ourselves out of MPs.
Yeah, that's not where I thought this was going to go, if I'm honest. But, so I'll wrap it up by asking you. Well, let me ask you this first, and then we'll wrap it up. Do you think we get the right people in politics? And I'll leave that open, and I'll say right in inverted commas, because I've been reading Isabel Hardman's book about why we get the wrong politicians. But what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think we always get the right person. And I think it kind of follows on from our discussion really around MPs and becoming ministers, and then having a role at national level. And I think that that role is hugely important. I mean, frankly, I don't want the Prime Minister or the Chancellor of the Exchequer to be worrying about whether or not James is going to get his front hedge cut or not.
Indeed.
Yeah. So But how do those two things sit together? I don't know. Am I voting for a future Prime Minister when I cast my vote for my MP? I'm not sure. I think most of the time I'm voting because I want them to represent my community.
Yeah.
But they represent their party. So
too often. Yeah, indeed. So if there were young people listening to this podcast, I know we sort of touched on this earlier, but I wanted to just end on this. Is there a message that you would give them? Because you sort of discussed, your story is very, very sort of crudely and loosely summed up, is you saw an injustice, you had a reaction to it, and you went and got yourself elected as a councillor, but you realised that you could maybe do more by working in government as opposed to elected politics. But what message would you give to young people that are maybe feeling irked by something and they're flirting with the idea of maybe going into either government or frontline politics, but they're not sure? They've seen your experience, they've seen how hostile it can be. Would you give? Do you have a reassuring message, or is it going to be more of a stark message, more sobering message? What would you say to young people who are sort of flirting on the peripheries of politics right now?
I think you have to look to yourself as to what it is that you're trying to do. If you want to make a difference locally in your community, then get involved. That's how you do it. It's as simple as that. Mm-hmm. And I think that the focus that comes from that, the people you'll meet along the way, etc., will far outweigh any momentary discomfort you have if somebody dares to express a different view than you've got, because that's what it's usually like.
Yeah.
But if your passion is to be the next Prime Minister, you are going to need to pull on those big girl or big boy pants, because that is a tough, cutthroat world. So is getting to the top of an advertising agency.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah. So that if you're driven by a sort of lust for, executive power, you're going to need to have thick skin if you want to climb that ladder. But if you're just a normal person and you just see something and you want to fix it, which I guess is the case for most of us. I don't think I've ever met anyone that has ever said it to me, I want to be the Prime Minister or anything. And that's why I say normal people. Local politics is a good place to go, is a good place to start. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's a place where you'll see a difference. You will make a difference.
And do you have faith in the sort of generation coming through to shake things up? And it certainly with the sort of what we discussed earlier with the kind of the sexist undertones, and
I think the current generation are much more aware. I think they're much more sensitive to these things. And I also think that they're much more sensitive to kind of like the whole save the planet agenda. I don't mean that to sound in a dismissive way. And again, that so feeds in to your local council agenda. It's the kind of things that you could do locally about reducing carbon emissions and things like that. If everybody got involved in every parish, that might change the world.
Yeah, small but many little changes can have a big, it's like the analogy of like an avalanche, isn't it? Like drops of snow, they all accumulate and all of a sudden you get an avalanche. No, totally. And that's all the questions I have on my bit of paper. Jackie Weaver, thank you very much.
Very list orientated, aren't you?
Well, I didn't want to go off piece too much because it's basically is risky. But at the same time, I feel like we did sort of cover stuff, loop back around, and then go back to it. So I think we'll see. I mean, I do have the power of the edit button at the end, so I can maybe piece it together. But I think it flowed okay in the end. I don't know.
Good.
But thank you very much for taking part. I hope those listening maybe learned something and also perhaps been inspired to either get more involved locally with the politics or possibly join the project Parliament.
Or if you do nothing else, bear witness.
Bear witness. Indeed.
You know, hold them to account.
Indeed, indeed. And that's something that we do have going for us, is that social media does allow us to do that to an extent. And I know plenty of people who do try to do it, but sometimes it feels like you are shouting at a wall at times. But anyway, Jack Hoover, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure talking to you, James.